that we will be receiving $9 million in early release of emergency relief funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration. And we received notice on Saturday that FEMA will be adding additional assistance available to public entities and nonprofits in 13 additional counties for permanent work, and that brings the total of that to 33 counties. There has been a tremendous amount of damage done to our entire levee system, and it is important and critical that the federal government take a look at this when it comes to levee reconstruction and improvement from a regional approach. And that's why on April 3rd, we hosted Governor Ricketts from Nebraska, Governor Parsons from Missouri. Governor Kelly from Kansas will be joining us going forward. She was not able to make that meeting. It was in Council Bluffs, and it was a meeting with the Corps and FEMA. We collectively expressed our united support for, again, a regional approach to levee reconstruction and improvement. We committed to meeting regularly to hold the Corps accountable. The next meeting, I think, is on the 26th. River management policy changes must improve flood control to protect people and communities. In addition to that, we also made it clear that temporary levee solutions must be considered part of the long-term solution. On April 8th, we were in Malvern. We held a State of Iowa Levee District Trustee and Corps Technical Review meeting. It was attended by over 60 people, a lot of the trustees from the levee districts up and down the levee system, and it was really the first step in a process to coordinate and have clear dialogue across levee districts, state governments to ensure that we have that we unfold a comprehensive flood control asset management plan for the Missouri River. Vice President Pence was back in the state on Friday. He had with him FEMA Acting Director Gaynor, and while here, he again reconfirmed the President's commitment to Iowa. We were able to do a flyover, and again, I think that was really critical that we did that because they just could not believe the amount of water that was still standing 1 month after the incidents. To move forward, it's critical that we not only provide funding at the state level, but also have a central point of coordination and plan to use the funds. And that's why today, or this morning, I signed Executive Order 4. It will establish a flood recovery advisory board. The executive order reads in part, try to condense some of it so it's not so long, but whereas on March 13th, 2019, continuing thereafter, historic and catastrophic flooding and flash flooding events began to impact the state of Iowa due to record snowfall and rapid snowmelt combined with heavy rains that caused dangerous flood conditions across much of the state. And whereas this flooding natural disaster has caused severe damage across the state, and especially along the Missouri River, where more than 50 levees were breached, nearly 250 miles of levees were impacted, nearly 25,000 homes were destroyed or had major damage, and more than 4,200 businesses were impacted. Whereas the estimated devastation of this flooding is over $1.6 billion, including $75 million in public assistance, $480 million individual assistance, $300 million in damages to local businesses, over $200 million in agricultural impacts to livestock, grain, and land, and over $500 million to both federal and non-federal levies. And whereas the damage has caused by this natural disaster has resulted in the issuance of a presidential major disaster proclamation on March 23rd, 2019, in addition to numerous disaster proclamations by the governor. And whereas the people of Iowa shall benefit from centralized coordination effort to guide the efforts to rebuild and recover from this flooding disaster. The duties of the Flood Recovery Advisory Board shall include, but not limited to, advising the governor on establishing and implementing short-term priorities for recovery and comprehensive long-term plans for redevelopment for the state of Iowa, identifying federal and state legislative policy needs for the recovery and rebuilding effort, coordinating between levels and branches of government to implement the recovery and rebuilding effort, identifying funding sources and innovative funding alternatives for recovery and redevelopment, developing solutions to fill the gaps in existing recovery and redevelopment programs, establishing priorities for the use of funds made available to the state as a result of this disaster event, including Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act as amended. Establishing timelines and benchmarks to measure and report progress in disaster recovery and redevelopment. Providing opportunities for the public, business, nonprofit organizations, communities, and other stakeholders to provide input into the recovery and rebuilding process, and developing a comprehensive plan for long-term rebuilding to provide guidance to state and local governments. The advisory board will have 6 working groups charged with assisting and coordinating the comprehensive recovery and rebuilding effort. They include finance, economic development, agriculture, workforce and housing, flood management and infrastructure, and public health. The Flood Recovery Advisory Board shall consist of up to 15 members. The governor shall serve as a member and chair of the advisory board and shall appoint up to 14 additional members, which shall include the chairs of the working groups established by this executive order. So the advisory board will strengthen partnerships across federal, state, local governments, and with private and nonprofit organizations, again, to deliver an effective and efficient rebuilding of impacted communities as a result of the flooding natural disaster. So, as I said, I signed it this morning. In addition to creating the Flood Recovery Advisory Board, today I'm also calling on the Iowa legislature to appropriate funding in support of Iowa residents displaced by the flood. Sometimes it can take months to years for FEMA and other federal funding to be made available to Iowans that are impacted by the flood. And we know that these communities and Iowans can't afford to wait. So today, I'm asking the legislature to make available $15 million from fiscal year 19 ending balance that will go to the Flood Mitigation Fund for impacted communities to help with cost share for flood control infrastructure repairs, as well as immediate fixes to for community safety. And so some examples of that, it will include levees, drainage areas, and channels for improvements to flood control for people, businesses, and communities impacted by the historic flooding. In addition to that, we're asking the legislature to approve another $10 million in fiscal year 20 for the workforce housing tax credits to help accelerate housing improvements in impacted areas. Again, the communities can't wait. We want to give businesses and communities the assurance that we are going to rebuild. We're going to do this better than before. We're going to be strategic about how we implement the recovery process, and we want them to know that the rebuilding starts now, and everyone in this room is committed and ready to go. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Governor, and good morning. While the Flood Advisory Board, which the Governor created through executive order this morning, will work to strengthen partnerships and provide a plan for state funds to be used effectively, we also must underscore the need for seamless coordination at the federal level. That's why Governor Reynolds and I are so appreciative of Senator Joni Ernst for holding a Senate Environment and Public Works Committee field hearing later this week in Southwest Iowa. The hearing will be on Wednesday, April 17th in Kaufman Hall in Glenwood from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. Senator Ernst is leading the hearing and will be joined by Senator Grassley as well. They have also called upon several key witnesses to testify at that field hearing. Major General Scott Spellman is the Deputy Commanding General of Civil and Emergency Operations with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Additionally, John Remus, Chief of the Missouri River Basin Water Management Division with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in their Northwestern Division, and Kathy Crane, the Mayor of Hamburg, as well as numerous other stakeholders. Governor Reynolds will also be attending and will be meeting with leaders from the Army Corps of Engineers at that time. We're grateful for Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst for their commitment to the rebuilding efforts, and we encourage the rest of the federal delegation to join in their efforts. Everyone's involvement in this will be critical to our success going forward. I think it's safe to say that all of us standing up here today appreciate the leadership of Iowa's congressional delegation as we address flooding in our state together. With that, I'd like to invite Iowa House Speaker Linda Upmeyer to the podium for a few words. Madam Speaker.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to echo what's already been said about the admiration and appreciation for the courage and tenacity of all the residents living in this disaster area, how tough it must be, and a big thank you to everyone that's helped them so far. But I really want to highlight and applaud what the governor's done. This is the most extraordinary hands-on engagement I've ever seen from a governor moving forward going through a disaster like this, leading the way, making sure that Congress hears our concerns, and a big thank you to our senators for helping with that, but making sure that Congress hears our concern and the necessity for immediate action. And certainly Governor, Lieutenant Governor, the House stands ready to do what is necessary to help move forward in an immediate way and cheer you on as we keep moving forward in every aspect of our rebuilding here in this state. It's so important that we recognize that if people don't have homes to live in, if they don't have an opportunity, they may not stay. That would be critical. So thank you for moving us forward, and I'd like to turn it over to Senator Whitford.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Governor, for your leadership on these terrible floods in southwest Iowa. I know Iowa Senate Republicans appreciate your focus on disaster recovery issues and the speed at which you are mobilizing responses and allocating resources to these impacted areas. Our caucus stands ready to work with you to expedite flood relief to those Iowans most in need. We are proud of our conservative budget that has provided resources to help address a natural disaster of this magnitude. I also want to urge the U.S. Senate to quickly act to pass the disaster relief funding request made in the immediate aftermath of the flooding in western Iowa that was quickly approved by the President. Flood recovery is a bipartisan issue, and it's unfortunate that some U.S. senators chose to come to Iowa, tour historic flood damage, then days later return to Washington, D.C. and vote against the Iowans they just met. One of the best examples of effective leadership is here in Iowa, where we're able to get things done effectively and quickly, while partisanship in Washington, D.C. stalls even the most basic of government functions. So thank you, Governor, for your leadership. Our caucus stands ready and willing to help in these recovery efforts.
We'll open it up for questions.
Is it